A rousing good morning to all of you, and welcome to worship that raises the roof. While this is a very special time this morning, nonetheless, each Sunday we welcome you to this time that we set aside to align our lives more closely to integrity, service, and joy. This morning we stand on the homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwa nations. We honor with gratitude the people who have stewarded the land throughout the generations and their ongoing contributions to this region. We confess the injustices that we have committed against the Dakota and Ojibwa nations, and we intend to interrupt this legacy, beginning with acts of healing and honest storytelling about this place. This morning we worship both in person and online, a congregation gathered in time rather than in a single place. May we all enter into worship fully, not held back by fear or distraction, or the unfamiliarity of new ways, or excessive self-consciousness. Whatever brought you here this morning, with all your gifts, with all your wounds, know that you're welcome. If this is your first time attending a service, we invite you to complete a visitor card available in the pews and online so that we can provide you with more information about church life. Visitors are also invited to attend Finding Yourself at Unity, a conversation each Sunday focused on a different topic about Unity Church. Today, the conversation will share information about how we care for one another in community through Unity's congregational and pastoral care. I want to draw your attention this morning to the quilt hanging in the sanctuary. It was made by Unity member, recently departed Unity member Martha Eves, and is lovingly displayed in her honor following her memorial service that was held here on Thursday. All this week, ministers, Unitarian Universalist Association staff, and delegates, including some from our own congregation, are gathered in Portland for the annual meeting of our association, our denomination, General Assembly. I want to especially call your attention to a program that happens every year in General Assembly. It'll happen this year on Thursday evening. It will be live streamed. It's called the Service of the Living Tradition. It honors ministers who are new to Unitarian Universalist congregations, those who have marked particular anniversaries in service, and those who are retiring. And this Thursday, the Service of the Living Tradition will honor Unity, will include in its honorees Unity's ministers emeriti, the Reverends Rob and Jan Eller Isaacs. So we'll have the opportunity, we'll provide you a link on our website where you can watch that service and celebrate Rob and Jan's retirement virtually. After our service this morning, Sarah and I look forward to greeting those of you present in person and invite you to visit the parish hall for refreshments and fellowship. Those joining us online are invited to a Zoom coffee hour. We'd also invite you to head on out to the green space today, where along with the family of Marvin Spears, we will dedicate the tent that was given to Unity in Marvin's honor. His family will be present to say a few words in the dedication, which is planned to start at noon. And now let us enter into worship with the ringing of the bell.
Good morning, everybody. We are so happy to be here. Most of us all the way from South Africa to come and exchange and serve with you. We are blessed to be here, and I hope you enjoy the next song. This piece is an original 2911 piece. Yes, it was written by me, yeah. It's about a black boy growing up during apartheid and seeking for a better life somewhere else. Came all the way to the United States of America and been living here for 20 years, only to find out I'm getting treated the same way as I was in South Africa, here in the USA. But I fret not, because I've got this joy within me. In spite of all the bad things that happens to us as a humanity, Ubuntu, we're gonna continue to love no matter the situation. Enjoy the next piece. Thank you.
I can follow that. Juneteenth is not a holiday I grew up celebrating. It's not a holiday, a story I ever knew about. Juneteenth is relatively new to the consciousness of many of us, because for 157 years, its story was not passed on in white communities. Juneteenth is a celebration of the moment enslaved people in some of the deepest parts of Texas finally learned they were legally free 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. They didn't know because none of the white power brokers, whether in fields of law enforcement or religion or communications, none of them accepted the new federal law or passed on its story to those whose lives and bodies had been plundered. Let me pivot with a promise to return to our stories. Recklessness, we are told growing up, is a characteristic to be avoided. My wife and I have a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old who make questionable decisions at a rapid pace with great certainty. Recklessness, in other words, is something that we feel too often surrounded and threatened by. But there's another characteristic to recklessness that we are going to need if we, both as individuals and a congregation, if we are to move beyond minimizing our differences, if we are to work to really see others, not the others we are taught to see, not the others we are encouraged to see, but to really see, we're going to have to be reckless in our extension of imagination, reckless in our extension of curiosity. Come, let us worship together.
be seated as we join in a moment of silence. Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. This morning, we stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illness seen or unseen, with mental disability or addiction. This morning we pray for our neighbors in prison, those who care for family members in ill health, those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days, and by those who rise above heartbreak to challenge oppression in all its forms. This morning we pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation as together we live into our longing to embody and build the beloved community. This morning we especially lift up these: we celebrate the life and mourn the death of James Hogan, a member of Unity Church for many decades. James died on June 1st at the age of 92 after suffering for many years from dementia. His wife Janice Hogan, also a Unity member, passed away 12 years ago. James is lovingly remembered by his sons Michael and David, and daughters Melissa, Jean, and Jill, their spouses, and many grandchildren. A memorial service will be held in Ames Chapel here at the church on Saturday, July 16th in the morning. Today and throughout this week, we hold in prayer Unitarian Universalist ministers, UUA staff, delegates from congregations across the nation and our own as they gather in Portland for the annual meeting. May all those gathered find fellowship and mutual encouragement. May their exchanges and decisions be wise, marked by equanimity and compassion. This morning we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May they and we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or hold in the silent sanctuary of your hearts the names of those you wish to lift today in worship. Please join now in prayer. Holy One, in the midst of whom we live and move and have our being, this particular Sunday, among all that we bring to mind and lift up in prayer, We particularly pray for fathers, the fathers we have known throughout the course of our lives, the fathers who've been there for us or tried to be there, those fathers who remained calm in a crisis, and those who could not remain calm but did not run away. Those of our fathers who did run away but came back again, and those of our fathers who never came back but always wished it might have been different. We honor, celebrate, and are grateful for our fathers, rich and poor, tall or short, those who helped raise us, those who formed us through their actions, through their lack of actions. We lift up in prayer our birth fathers, adoptive fathers, stepfathers, and foster fathers, fathers who have no children of their own but who step in to help raise the child of a neighbor or friend, grandfathers and uncles, trans fathers, queer fathers, gay fathers, anyone willing to take on the role of fathers for us. Through love and hatred, joy and tears, addiction, mental health issues, perfect health. Through sickness, aging, wealth and poverty, absence and presence. We recall our fathers. They are because of us. We are because of them. Amen.
The song talks about love, it talks about peace, it talks about a hope for the future, it talks about never giving up. This beautiful anthem, many people died for, that stood for freedom. Many people was put in jail for singing this piece. And because of our forefathers, our grandparents, our mothers, our fathers, they never gave up hope for a free South Africa. And because of their uprising, this song became our national anthem. Never give up, church. Never give up. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. Never give up. Enjoy this next piece.
My
Your financial support of the church. Some strange juxtapositions in our service this morning. Your financial support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to each other and to the world. The contributions you make enable us to do the work we've pledged to do, both within our church community and out beyond our walls. Each Sunday, the majority of our offering is passed on to community partners with whom we share common cause. If you'd like to nominate an organization to receive our Sunday offering, you can find a form to do so on the church website. Today, the larger portion of our offering will be shared with Queer Space Collective, an organization with a vision for all LGBTQ youth to have a network of support to help them develop a strong sense of pride in who they are, where they come from, and where they want to go. Specifically, this collection will support their outreach programs aimed at reducing youth isolation, suicide, and homelessness. Would the ushers please come forward? Please give as generously as you can, and know that with these offerings, we dedicate ourselves and the offerings to doing the larger work of our church, which is weaving a tapestry of love we call community.
Hi. Hello. Okay. The song that we are about to sing is called Shosholoza. It is a song sung in South Africa, whether we happy, whether we sad, whether we all sorts. It was sung back in the days by the miners moving from one place to another place rather. Please enjoy it. Those who know it, please join us. Shosholoza.
Juneteenth has been celebrated in Black communities since 1865, though the terror of Jim Crow violence led to quieter, more private celebrations in communities for many years. It's not included in any of our textbooks, mentioned in our churches, designated as a holiday in so many municipalities, or noted on our calendars. Juneteenth, therefore, presents us with a challenge. In his new and best-selling book, How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery in America, Clint Smith makes an argument that each of us is simply a patchwork of the stories we've been told. And if that is the case, if each of us is simply a patchwork of the stories we have been told, then we'd better get busy figuring out who decided and why, what stories we would hear and which we would never hear. The story of what happened June 19, 1865 in Galveston, Texas has been controlled, restricted, misrepresented, and most powerfully held as a secret from the lives of those it impacted. And because Juneteenth is a celebration of a moment that dominant culture would rather us not see and has fought in a myriad ways that we never do see, it serves as a challenge to all of us to figure out what else has been kept from us, what other stories we have failed to pass down. Feminist Gertrude Stein is one of my favorite thinkers and writers. In her work, she calls our attention to language itself as something that limits what we are able to see, to understand, to express. What she does with language is poke at it to find its contradictions, to find the places where it restricts and predicts our ability to see and understand. In much of her work, she calls our attention to language to show us how to find the cracks in the stories, to show us how to worry at the contradictions, to show us why reckless curiosity and reckless imagination are likely the two most important tools we have if we are interested in seeing beyond that which we are encouraged to see beyond the enclosure of formulated thought that is our culture's language. To illustrate her concept, she uses a great many metaphors for language to show us how it functions. In her book, Tender Buttons in 1917, language is metaphorically a kind of container, a carafe, a cover that arranges within it all that we see. This container of language might be glass, it might be a lacquer finish, such as a clear covering over a wooden table. We think we are looking at the thing within or beyond it. The lacquer finish is seductive in its illusion. Language, Stein suggests, is charming, very charming, and its glittering surface handsome and convincing. We pay very little attention to the thing, the language we use to know, to name, to understand. We consider it simply a tool that gives us unfettered access to the truth of things and a complete freedom of expression. But in fact, the container, the cover, the lacquer-covered container actually controls what we see. It is an enclosure of formulated thought. Her use of lacquer, the lacquer finish coating of the container, illustrates her point that the language looks like the thing itself, but is in fact a powerful and mitigating force between us and the thing itself. Stein's challenge is applicable to the equity journey we are on at Unity, a journey to move beyond minimizing our differences and better seeing one another. Why is that so hard? Why is our intention to see not enough? Stein would tell us that it is so hard because of that cover, the lacquer-coated cover. Say that a bunch of times. The lacquer-coated cover between us and the world, between us and one another. Culture is a collection of stories, and we are all, as Smith suggests, a patchwork of the stories we have been told. These stories, by design, give us the impression that we are seeing that which is real, while actually distorting, restricting, and controlling our seeing, all without us noticing. These lacquer-covered tools, the stories we tell, are the only things we have to understand and communicate about our world. But none of us can ever get outside of that cover. None of us can step outside of our culture's formulated perceptions to see without that filter. So how and when do we get to an unmitigated vantage point? We never do. None of us can. But we do have the capacity of imagination. We cannot get outside of the lacquer-covered container that is the language of our culture in order to see it objectively, but we can, Stein would remind us, we can recognize that it is there, that we are each of us a patchwork of the stories we have been told, and we can, Stein urges us, we can take this collection of cultural stories and we can take it away and wear it, and then be reckless, be reckless. When we are reckless with these stories, when we are reckless in our extension of our imagination and curiosity, when we poke at stories that look at first glance like the whole truth, when we explore them, when we start to find cracks, and then when we worry at those cracks, when we confront the inconsistencies that we've been raised to let lie, when we poke, imagine, and be recklessly curious, Stein says, then there can be breakages. And those breakages, allowable only in the cracks created by our insistence on questioning the lenses we've been given. Those breakages create the moments when we see what our culture has worked so hard to make sure we never see. We have got to stop looking away when our culture bids us do so. If we want the honest storytelling our own land acknowledgement calls for, we have no choice but to take this lacquer-covered container that is the language of our culture, and we've got to take it away and wear it and be reckless, be reckless. We've got to find the cracks in that cover, and we've got to worry those cracks in the hope of creating breakages. Let us be reckless then. Let us be reckless together.
I grew up enveloped by images of the world coming to an end. Every Sunday, as my family attended morning and evening services at our small-town Southern Baptist church, I heard about the inevitability of the entire world coming to a sudden and terrifying end, replete with chaos and destruction that would result when all life was over and souls were transported to heaven or hell for judgment. I lived in a part of Texas favored by hurricanes, and twice we endured a direct hit by a hurricane that, while not utterly ending our little world, did wreak a fair amount of havoc, with flooding and downed trees and snakes washed ashore from the many bayous in the area. And my father brought into our home an atmosphere of impending world's end that was the result of his having grown up in a family marred by frequent loss and tragedy, so much so that he sought to build a lifestyle to protect all of us from the dangers he believed were ever present and overwhelming. And yet, against these many frightening scenes of the world's end, I grew up spending many hours, especially in the long summers, creating alternate worlds, fantasy worlds with lots of horses and adventures that always concluded with my doing something heroic in worlds that never came to an end. Most spiritual traditions include stories and beliefs about both the beginning of the world and its ending. Some present these ideas as literal. Others intend these ideas of a world end to be understood metaphorically as images of complete change, of conversion that alters everything. Whether literal or metaphorical, spiritual teachings about the end of the world are rich in imaginative detail as they lay out unusual landscapes, powerful beings, rivers and lakes of fire, hordes of demons, choirs of angels, battles that unfold across the entire universe. While poet T.S. Eliot might have anticipated that the world ends not with a bang but a whimper, spiritual visions head in the opposite direction, and world endings are always events of high drama. Throughout June, our worship services are focused on the theme of imagination, a capacity that we alternately savor and suppress, depending on whether we're casting about for something new and creative or trying to run from something terrifying. Imagination can be playful and pleasurable, like my child's imagining of worlds filled with horses. Imagination can send us into the darkest of places, whether we are children imagining monsters under the beds, whether, like my father, our imaginations have us seeing only danger and doom all around, or an image of a world that ends in destruction and punishment. We're encouraged to imagine possibilities for peace and justice. Then we hear that it's best not to rely on imagination, but to stay firmly grounded in reality, so that imagination and reality are set up as binaries opposed to one another. And perhaps nowhere else does imagination, in all its wonder, all its negativity, appear as in the stories we hear and tell about a world that has ended and a world we long to have emerge. Our individual life journeys will likely lead us, whether we want or not, through experiences of having our own particular worlds end. I've lived through the ends of my worlds, when primary relationships broke apart, when I fell into the pit of depression, when my son left home for college. Each time I leave a congregation, as I will leave you soon, to serve elsewhere. Regardless of whether I saw my world endings as natural, desirable, or unwanted and something I longed to avoid, the end was painful, dislocating, and risky, because I had to discern when to let go so the ending could proceed because it really needed to happen, or when I should maybe fight with all my might against the ending. And then as the ending kept going, I had to further discern whether to grab some escape route out of it, or whether it was best for me to remain where I was and let the world end, because if I remained where I was, I could be ready for whatever was coming next. In other words, each time I had to figure out, was the ending just an ending? Or was it the sort of ending that precedes a beginning? The same Baptist church which taught us about the end of the world also taught us that our beliefs would provide protection from the ends of a world we might encounter in terms of personal hardship and loss, as well as beliefs that would protect us from the universal end of the world coming with the Last Judgment. That is, having the right beliefs meant a life without harm, without suffering. And if harm or suffering came our way, then we should see that as a signal that beliefs had gone awry, that we weren't right with God. To use the metaphor of a crack in a pervading perspective that Sara lifted up in her reflection, cracks in the narrative we learned of how right living meant happiness and safety were cracks in the narrative we learned of how right living would bring us happy and safety were to be seen as occasions of wrong belief when those cracks showed up that needed to be corrected. Stories that keep us protected may be the most impregnable, the least susceptible to cracking, and therefore the most likely to interfere with spiritual growth. And whether those are the stories of a fundamentalist church, the stories of consumer culture, the stories of white supremacy, the stories that have become embedded in how this congregation sees itself, a story which allows for minimizing differences and avoiding difficult change and maintaining power, is a story that is going to be hard to crack open and see the reality it obscures. When a crack does appear, our first responses are likely to be responses that try to quick seal it back up. because we will do almost anything to hold off change, especially when the change is in our best interest. And we will do almost anything to hold off overwhelming change because it brings the end of a world we've known. And yet, all around us, the world is already ending. The pandemic brought an end to a world in which we could move about freely and without risk, cracking open that story to show to us how little control we have over anything and how our control can be completely thwarted by a microbe. Our anti-racist work keeps prying cracks in a story that would comfort us with reassurance about how we're good-hearted liberals who do good work, and therefore we don't need to look into our own hearts to see the biases we carry. The recent events in this church, with a congregational meeting that resulted in a divided vote and people feeling they could no longer easily talk with one another, split a fissure in a story about unity as a unified congregation where we all want the same thing. A comforting story of minimization that allowed everyone to overlook the real, deep differences here. Worlds ending all around us. And we can scramble to seal up the cracks in the smooth lacquer of stories that allow us to feel safe and comfortable. We can run for escape routes to be anywhere but here in the midst of brokenness. We can stand fast. We can maybe even contribute to the cracking with questions that ask and don't take an easy answer, that ask, what's going on here? What's really going on here? And each time we ask, we consent once more to a world ending. When an especially powerful hurricane was set to strike the part of Texas where we lived, my parents took us to the local Baptist church for shelter, figuring we would be safer there in a large stone edifice than we would in our little frame house. My memories of that time in the church are happy ones, despite the obvious anxiety all the adults sheltering there were holding as we listened to the winds howl and the rains beat on the roof. In contrast to how I usually experienced that church, as Sunday after Sunday I had to sit still and quiet listening to scary sermons about the world's end, being in the church during the hurricane was a wonderful change. My siblings and I were allowed to run in the sanctuary. We played tag and hide and seek, wending in and out of the pews, being as loud as we wanted. We had our pick of toys in the nursery, of art supplies in the classrooms. We were free to stay up as late as we wanted. We dined on picnic food, even for breakfast, because there was no electricity to cook. At one point, my father gathered us to go outside, where, much to my surprise, everything was quiet and still. No wind, no rain, blue sky above where birds were circling. My father explained that this was the eye of the hurricane, a small place of peace in the midst of an overwhelming storm. And he said we should never assume when the eye came over that the hurricane was done with us. Instead, it would always return, more fiercely than before. I find myself wondering now, are we standing in an eye with more storm to come? Or is the storm finally done and the world is ended, and now we can set about the work of rebuilding? We have again and again over the last 2 years believed the pandemic was finally finished, only to have it come back. We have repeatedly watched action taken to correct an injustice, and for a time things are quiet until the next atrocity happens. We work our way through turmoil in our personal lives and reach a place of stability and want to believe we're set, and then the other shoe drops on our heads. We have a few conversations here at church. A new interim minister is hired, and we think that perhaps we can just move on from the divisions of the vote. The eye of the storm is deceptive, as my father wanted us to know. It is so tempting to believe that maybe the world does not have to end for change to come. But if we're serious about the change we seek, if we believe the story we've been telling and living in, the story about our community and racism, about our church and our desire here for a diverse congregation, about our own lives and our intention to live with wonder and joy and open-hearted engagement, if we're serious when we say all that, then we will have to accept that when the story is taken apart, when cracks in the smooth lacquer that has surrounded and protected us for so long and allowed us to be safe, that we see those cracks and do not rush to patch them, but instead try to push them further apart. And in so doing, know that we will find more of the storm coming, more discomfort, more disruption, more transition, more time to live through before the new world, which will emerge from the breakup of the old, becomes clear and trustworthy. And how we draw upon the gift of imagination will be crucial as we navigate the end of a familiar world. Already we see so many evidences around us of what imagination constructs when it bends in the direction of fear, polarization, mistrust, closing ranks, excluding anyone who does not look like everyone else. It can be harder to see what the imagination constructs when it bends in the direction of justice, inclusion, trust, in the direction of a willingness to disagree and be in conflict and stay present and stay open. New worlds come slowly. They emerge in fits and starts, and they require care and tenderness if they're not to be stomped out by all that resists a world ending. The stillness of the eye eventually began to give way to the stirring of wind, and we retreated back inside the dark church. That first taste of peaceful weather made it hard to go back inside. We began to wish we could just go home. But the experience of the hurricane eye also gave us a needed infusion of hope. Calm, birds, blue sky reminded us that there was a world beyond the hurricane and that the storm would not last forever, which are needed reminders whenever we find ourselves confronting chaos in our lives, whether the ending was a good one that needed to happen, or one that came upon us without warning or choice. Even those who preach a literal end to the world never claim that the ending is actually the ending, the last chapter after which there's nothingness. Whether with hurricanes, visions of Armageddon, community uprisings, conflicts in what we'd thought was a unified church, or an experience of loss that can feel like the end of the world, the message is a consistent one. Destruction and division is not the last word. New worlds keep coming into being. New lives are possible, however impossible that may seem at the moment. The end of the world is not, finally, the end of the world. Spirit, for our last hymn, number 149, lift every voice and sing. The words of the benediction this morning are adapted from a Celtic blessing. May goodness be yours, and 7 times well may you live your life. May you be an island in the stream, a hill on the shore, a star in the night, a staff for someone suffering. May the love of others for you overflow your heart, and may your heart in turn overflow with love for all you see. Shalom, salam, namaste, amen.
We invited Sophie to come and sing with us. Can we give her a nice hand of applause? It's our duty as citizens of this earth to be a united front. It's our duty as black people not to make white people feel guilty. It's our duty to embrace you. The past is the past. We will remember the past. But together, as one nation, black, brown, tan, lighter brown, white, to work together and celebrate humanity. We are not here to make you feel guilty, but revolution can start in you see you, right? Do you believe that?